welcome all of you who are watching on Facebook Live. And we want to encourage those of you who are live in the room with us to check in on your smartphones, let people know that you're here, why you're here. We were going to do handshakes a little later, but I'm going to do it now so that we can fix Jody's bass, because I want to hear some bass in the house, and we're not hearing it. So take a minute and say hello, and make sure everyone is welcome, and get a hug or a handshake in, and we're going to get a bass guitar fixed. Where you go, I'll go. Where you stay, I'll stay. When you move, I'll move. I'll follow. All your ways are good. All your ways are sure. I will trust in you alone. Higher than my sights, high above my life. I will trust in you alone. Yeah. Where you go, I'll go. Where you stay, I'll stay. When you move, I'll move. I will follow. If you love, I love. If you serve, I serve. If this life I lose, I will follow you. I will follow you. Light into the world, light into my life. I will live for you alone. You're the one I seek, knowing I will find. faithfulness stretches to the sky. So all these songs have this common theme of God's amazing love for us. And this next one is one we've done maybe a couple times. I love it because it's kind of a retelling of the Lord's Prayer, the prayer that Jesus taught us to pray. Our Father, who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name, right? Many of us grew up praying that prayer, or have heard it. It's familiar to our whole culture. But sometimes it's good to kind of take it apart a little bit and say, what are we saying? So to say it differently, to sing it differently, sometimes helps us. So I want to pray right now, even as we go into the song, that God would open our eyes to what he has to say to us. Lord, thank you that you invite us into this place this morning. Thank you that we can be your family. We can experience your real, deep, abiding love. That we want to be love to the world around us, too. We want to be hope in a hopeless time and place. We want to be light in a dark world. And God, thank you for this prayer that Jesus taught us to pray. And as we sing it and pray it again in a new way today, speak to our hearts, and may we speak to yours. In the name of Jesus, amen. Heavenly Father, always amaze me. Let your kingdom come in my world and in my life. You give me the food I need to live through the day. And forgive me as I forgive the people that wrong me. Lead me far from temptation. Deliver me from the evil one. I look out the window, birds are composing. Notice out of tune, out of place. I walk to the meadow, stare at the flowers. They're dressed than any girl on her wedding day. So Christine is coming to share some announcements with us.
Hello, everyone. Morning. Hi, Christine. Hello. Welcome to the Quest. Just one announcement today. Join us Saturday, July 21st from 1 to 4 p.m. Kids Quest is hosting a water day, and it's not just for kids, it's for everybody. So visiting cousins, visiting grandkids, just neighbors, everyone's welcome. Saturday, July 21st, 1 to 4 p.m. We're going to have a big water slide. We're going to have hot dogs, lemonade, probably ice cream. Everyone should come because you know it's going to be 100 degrees that day. So hope to see you there. Kids Quest can come with me.
I'd like to introduce this song while we take our offering. If you're a member of the Quest, we can certainly use your funds. If you're a guest, please let the basket pass you by.
Give a little bit, give a little bit of your love to me. Give a little bit, I give a little bit of my love to you. There's so much that we need to share, so send a smile and show you care. Give a little bit, I give a little bit of my life for you. So give a little bit of your time to me. See,
special note there.
And Jim, you're up.
Good morning, everybody. I'm Jim Wimott. It's good to be here today. As you can see, I don't need the microphone. David asked me to introduce Gilbert Foster to you, and he sent me the bio. I read through it and put it in my head, and then I got here and realized the exact same bio was in your bulletin. So I'm not going to read you his bio. I'm going to tell you the story. So 3 months ago, Gilbert left a message on my voicemail. And I'm listening to it in the kitchen, and my wife and 18-year-old daughter are in the kitchen, and they both went, "Who is that?" I said, "That's Gilbert Foster. He's a minister." He said, "Well, when he comes to the Quest, let us know, because we want to hear his voice." So Gilbert and I became involved about 3 years ago with When I Grow Up, and what Gilbert taught me is the impossible is possible, and he'll get you out of your comfort zone, but he does it with love. And with that, Gilbert Foster.
Well, I don't know what message I left in your phone, Jim. But it's good to be in the Quest. And this is falling down. I just need a little table. I see one here. Thank you. Not my first time here. And I've known the Quest Church since this church began. And I've watched your story, every twist, every turn, every up, every down, and your story continues. A new chapter is being written, but it's still your story. And the story of a people who are belonging to God and are trying to live out the life of God here in this little piece of God's earth. And you got a nice little piece of it. I'm from Fresno. So myself and many others are hoping that as you take the pen and begin to write this next chapter of your story, that you write it well. Because it needs written well, not just for you, but for the people around here and beyond here. And it needs written well for Jesus' sake. But this morning is Sunday morning worship, and it's preaching time. Okay? So I'm going to do a little bit of Scottish preaching. And if you've ever driven in Scotland, we don't have straight roads. And we're going to twist and turn a little bit, and we'll end up somewhere, hopefully together, and hopefully at the same time. Unless you have a Giants game to go to, and you just feel you need to leave and abandon the Lord for a few hours. So I'm a Cubs fan, okay? You can tell from my accent I'm from Chicago. That's where I come from, actually. I came from Scotland to Chicago. I lived in Chicago for a couple of years and fell in love with the city, and then came over here and have been in the valley for the last, however long purgatory is. That's how long I'm there, okay? So here we go. I'm Gilbert, and if you've never been here when I preached, let me remind you, it's not me who has the accent. You guys took our language and you killed it. Say no more than, like, you guys stand in line. We form a queue. Doesn't it sound so much more sophisticated? You know, and where did the H go in herb? I'm Scottish, the tough part of Britain. Like, we don't mind wearing skirts as men, you know. Even the Romans didn't want to invade us. Only two countries the Roman Empire never conquered of the then world, Iran and Scotland. They built a wall between England and us, Hadrian's Wall. They did not want to come over. They looked and they saw men with skirts and they said, no way. Okay? But every Scot knows the word that birthed our nation. Whiskey. No, I'm kidding. Okay. If you've ever watched Braveheart, you'll know the word I'm referring to. It's the first War of Independence, 1296, like you guys weren't around, okay? You're babies. You're just a young nation. You're trying to be an empire. We once were, okay? But William Wallace, sadly played by an Australian, his face is painted white and blue, the St. Andrew's Scottish flag, with the haunting war voice of the bagpipes in the background. Beaten and about to die, William Wallace, with his last breath, cries, "Freedom!" And that's a powerful word. It's a word that birthed our nation, and it's a word that features large in the history of this nation. My country, 'tis of thee, sweet land of liberty. How does it go? Land where my fathers died, land of the pilgrim's pride. From every mountain side, let freedom ring. Freedom. I want to talk about another word. A word that birthed something bigger and greater than this nation or any other nation. I'm going to read from the Bible. You can follow along with me as I read. It might be up on the screen as well, this portion. It's from a book at the end of the Scriptures called John's First Epistle. And I want to read chapter 4 and a little bit of these verses to kind of hang what I'm going to say for the next 30 minutes on or so. So it says these words. Verse 7 of First Epistle to John, chapter 4. Beloved, let us love one another, for love is of God. And everyone who loves is born of God and knows God. He who does not love does not know God, for God is love. In this, the love of God was manifested towards us, that God has sent his one and only Son into the world, that we might live through him. In this is love, not that we loved God, but that he loved us and sent his Son as an atoning sacrifice for our sins. Beloved, if God so loved us, we also ought to love one another. Beloved. Maybe your version of the Bible says, dear friends. But the real word, the better word, is this rather strange, old-fashioned sounding word. Beloved. But let's get there a little bit later, okay? For a few years, I sat under the teaching of a pastor who I have the greatest respect for, and he taught me so much. And in a book that he wrote called Love Beyond Reason, he writes about learning about two kinds of love. There's one kind of love that seeks value in its object. This kind of love is a love of people or a love of things because they are lovable. Like, I love ice cream. I love lazy Saturday mornings. I love Apple products and apple pie with ice cream. I love real football. I love Ghirardelli chocolate. I love Godiva chocolate. I love Cadbury's chocolate. I love Lindt chocolate. I love See's chocolate. I love Belgium chocolate. I love Swiss chocolate. I love milk chocolate. I love fruit dipped in chocolate. I love nuts dipped in chocolate. I love chocolate dipped in chocolate. I love chocolate. I love campfires. We love July the 4th. Some of you do. Some of us think it was treason. Now, that's a whole other story. We love the Cubs. Some of you love the Giants. We love the Golden State Warriors. Yeah, we love Steph Curry. I mean, I've never met the guy, but I love the guy. Okay? We love the Raiders. Losing. Losing. There is a love that looks for what is beautiful or lovely, expensive, tasty, has status, is successful, is lovable. This love seeks value in what it loves. That's the first kind of love. But there is a second kind of love, another kind of love. There is a kind of love that creates value in what it loves. G.K. Chesterton, interesting theologian, points out, I must be loved before I am lovable. Can you remember Beauty and the Beast? Not many of us are Beauty. Most of us are Beast. I must be loved before I am lovable. Let me speak a little bit into your soul for a few moments. Being loved before you are lovable is not a natural act. Being loved before you are lovable is not an easy act. Being loved before you are lovable is revolutionary. It's love of another kind. And this is the revolution that Jesus brought into the world way before Disney. It was this that began a strange community called the church. Beloved, love of another kind. Love beyond reason, beyond rationale. Love beyond human ability. Love beyond. Now, take the writer of this little epistle, this little letter at the end of the New Testament, John. John understood Beauty and the Beast. John was a disciple, a follower of Jesus, and in the Gospel of John that he kind of has a part in writing, there's a little nickname that he gives himself. He was known as the disciple whom Jesus loved. Now, of course, Jesus loved all the disciples. Jesus was a master at the art of love. But it took a particular form when it came to John. There's a New Testament professor called N.T. Wright, and he writes a little bit about how John was the youngest of the disciples. And this is significant, especially in a culture where age goes with honor. So in our culture, we excuse youth. He's only young. But in ancient Eastern culture, maturity, being aged, was viewed with distinction, and youthfulness was frowned upon. You ever been the runt of the pack? That kind of feeling? So to be young, to be the youngest in that culture, was to be the least important, the least strategic, the least mature, the least valued. The Apostle John writes, and maybe it's a coded message to his fellow disciples who are all older than him, or maybe it's just a dig at them, I don't know. But he says, I'm the one that Jesus loved. And John writes a lot about being loved and about this other kind of love. And it was so striking that he and the other New Testament writers, they had to find a new word to describe this kind of love. And they came up with an old Greek word called agape. And maybe if you've been around church for any length of time, you might have heard of this word, agape. It had been around for centuries before the church, but it was an obscure and rarely used word in the Greek language. Back in those days, the word was rather bland. It just meant to prefer one thing instead of the other. Like I would prefer England to beat Russia, But in the New Testament, they seized this word agape and they filled it with this idea of love of another kind, of a love that doesn't seek what's going to be valued, but creates value. The church took this word and they filled it with this aspect of loving something, and in that love, you're loving it before it's lovable, and you're creating value in it. And the church became all about agape. This Jesus took strange, odd types of people, and he brought them together as this community of disciples. Strange and odd people he brought together. Like, take a look around. Strange and odd, peculiar people. He loved the young as much as the old. He treated women equal to men. He loved the community outsiders as much as the community insiders. He loved the Gentile as much as the Jew. He loved all because he was love of another kind. And the church became this community of ragamuffins. The church became this community of love. The church became the possessors and the agents of this new kind of love. And John wants us to understand this, and so he begins by saying, "Beloved, let us love one another." Beloved. You ever been to the old wedding ceremonies where, the pastor stands and says, "Dearly beloved, we are gathered here today." It can sound like a word that only pastors would say. There's male and female, then pastors. They're like a third sex, It sounds sometimes a little bit pious. But you have to understand this. This little word, beloved, wasn't just a word. That little word, beloved, was an idea. That little word, beloved, changed the world. So how do you tell people what this agape love is like? It's vast. It's so thoroughly different than any of the love you would find out there. How do you go about telling people this new, incredible concept? There once was a pastor who decided that his congregation were not always getting the point of his preaches. That's why we go bald and die young, okay? So perhaps to help them get this point across, he should use a visual demonstration. So, one Sunday morning, he comes out onto the platform, and he has 4 jars in front of him. And into each jar, he drops a wiggly worm. And the first jar was filled with alcohol, and he drops the worm into it. And the second jar was filled with cigarette smoke, and he drops the worm into it. And the third jar was filled with chocolate syrup, and he drops the worm into it. And the fourth jar was filled with dirt, drops the wiggly worm in. At the end of the sermon, he goes to the worm that was dropped into the jar full of alcohol, and it was dead. He goes to the next worm that had been dropped into the second jar of cigarette smoke, and it was dead as well. Then he goes to the worm that had been dropped into the chocolate. No, it was dead. But when he came to the worm in the fourth jar with the dirt and the soil, it was still alive. And so he asks the congregation, what do you learn from this demonstration? What's the point? And then a little lady at the back of the church raises her hand and says, as long as you drink, smoke, and eat chocolate, you'll never have worms. It's the challenge of speaking, okay? Making sure that people understand what you're communicating, that you don't miss the point. And here's this huge, vast, new concept of agape, love of another kind. How does Jesus communicate what he's about? It's so thoroughly different. So I'll tell you what he does. He does a visual demonstration to make sure his people get it. Pretty clever. This is now Matthew's Gospel, chapter 4. Jesus is about to start his entire mission to save the world. And he stands up tall and he gives his first public address as the new rabbi, the new leader in town. And the visual demonstration is the town that he's chosen to give his speech in. His first public address of this new agape. And you can read those words there. He went and he lived in Capernaum, which was by the lake in the area of Zebulun and Naphtali. And from that time on, Jesus began to preach his message, repent for the kingdom of heaven is near. And so to begin his ministry, his proclamation, his agape revolution, he heads north to this place called Capernaum. Now, a little bit of geography. No one who wants to start a movement starts it in Capernaum. No one came there who was royalty, like Herod Antipas, who was the grandson of Herod the Great, and he ruled that north part of Israel as a client king. He wasn't really a king. He was endorsed by the Romans and he was allowed to act like a king, but he had to pay taxes to the Romans who were really in charge. Well, he didn't rule from Capernaum. He ruled from the comfort of his palace in Tiberias, which licked the shores of Galilee just 5 miles north of Nazareth, where Jesus was. Pontius Pilate, who was the Roman procurator, the real authority in town, he ruled all of Israel from the comfort of Herod the Great's palace in Jerusalem. But Jesus went to where no one else would go as a visual demonstration that what he was about was completely and utterly different. And to this destitute, forgotten, ignored border town, he demonstrates how utterly new his agape revolution was. So different than any other so-called revolution. Now I know it's going to be difficult for the people of Marin County to imagine a place that is hot and dry and brown and dusty, where no president running for office ever comes. It's hard for you guys who live in the beauty of the blue skies here with the bay and Mount Tam. But some of us who live in Fresno, like, we get it, okay? We are modern day Capernaum, okay? It's not the end of the world, but you can see it from Fresno. Called Bakersfield, okay? But in Capernaum, in Capernaum, alongside the dust, there was poverty and economic hardship. They were far removed from the urban center of Jerusalem where all the trading took place. And there was oppression and injustice. It was ruled by the Romans, but it was really ruled through the hands of a powerful Hasmonean dynasty, Herod Antipas, who was the grandson of Herod the Great, and what an idiot he was, and a greedy, horrible guy. There was disease. There was no hospital in Capernaum. And this was the land, if you look at the text, this was the land of Naphtali and Zebulun. In other words, Galilee of the Gentiles. What does that mean? This was a town with racial tensions, ethnic conflict, religious pluralism. Capernaum was dark and hard and forgotten and ignored. If you lived in Capernaum, you felt the oppression. You felt the darkness. It was like a shadow of death. You experienced a hard, unloving reality. But into this darkness, light was breaking through. Into the hard and the cold was coming agape. And it was breaking through for the Amharats. The Amharats. The Amharats, this would be translated the people of the land. The rabbis considered these kinds of people as incapable of understanding the law. And if you couldn't understand the law, you couldn't be a part of God's people. They were viewed as ignorant, backward, uncouth, rifra, the commoners, the indigenous people, the illegals. The rabbis had a list of 6 things that were a disgrace for a student rabbi to do. Number 5 on the list, it was a disgrace for a student rabbi to recline at a table with a common person, the Amharats. Recline at a table means to eat a meal together, because you would lie at a table to eat the meal. So the rabbi's teaching his students, you never eat a meal with the Amharats, the commoners. Who you ate with was a social statement. Still is. I wrote much of this message as I flew coach. I always fly coach. I'm back from Kenya, about to head to Guatemala. And 6 rows away through a curtain were the first class passengers. They had their comfy chairs, and they were sipping their complimentary cocktails and eating their complimentary food. And they ate, and we watched as we sipped our complimentary bottle of water with a bag of cardboard pretzels. The snack out of hell. It's a social status. Picture the school cafeteria. There's the jocks table and the cheerleaders table. And then Jesus comes along and he messes up the whole order, because he invites the nerds and the dweebs to sit at the jocks table. And he makes the outsiders the insiders. The last became first. And every time he does it, there's a flip response. If the last are made first, then the first are no longer first. And if he makes the outsiders the insiders, then there's no insiders. And the people in Jesus' day who were first, and the people in Jesus' day who were the insiders, they knew who Jesus was preaching at, and they did not like it. This got Jesus into a whole bunch of trouble. The Pharisees, the Jewish upper class, they hated him because of who he loved, because of who he invited in, because he didn't just love the lovables. Jesus flipped the social norms. Jesus changed the rules, even the rule of love. Read a fascinating story which quoted a guy by the name of Robert Roberts. Like, were his parents smoking when he was born, you know? Robert Roberts was his name, okay? And he writes about a 4th grade class in which the teacher introduced a game called the balloon stomp. A balloon was tied to the leg of every child. And when the signal was given, the object of the game was for the students to try to pop everybody else's balloon without their own being popped. And the last child with their balloons still intact would be the winner. Balloon stomp is a zero-sum game. If I win, you lose. Everybody else's success diminishes my chances of success. So therefore, I must regard everyone else as someone to overcome, someone to be pitted against. It's a Darwinian contest, survival of the fittest. And the fourth grade class went at it with this Darwinian spirit. Balloons were relentlessly targeted and destroyed. No ones were safe. And the battle was over in just seconds. And the kid with the still inflated balloon on his ankle who won, secretly the most disliked kid in the class. Then Roberts writes that a disturbing thing happened. A second class were brought into play this game, only it was a class of developmentally challenged children. They were also given a balloon and the same instructions. Spectators watched on with like a sinking feeling in their stomachs about how these kids might take the destruction of their colorful balloon. But something happened. The instructions had been given too quickly for the kids to understand. But the one idea that seemed to sink in was that the balloons were supposed to be popped. But instead of fighting each other off, these children got the idea that they're supposed to help one another pop the balloons. So they formed a kind of balloon co-op. Okay? And one boy was getting frustrated because the little balloon on the little girl's leg that he was after, the little girl wouldn't hold still. So she bent down and held her balloon while he stomped on it. And then he knelt down and held his balloon while she stomped on it. And all around the room, kids were helping kids in this great stomp. And when everybody's balloon was popped, there was smiles all around. And on it went. So who got the game right and who got the game wrong? Jesus came and he changed the entire game. You no longer love something because of its value, but you love someone and you create in them value. Jesus loved people before they were lovable. Will Willimon, bishop in Alabama, was recently asked about the biggest challenge facing the church and Christians in the next 50 years, and his answer was fabulous. He replied, "May Christians be half as interesting as Jesus." You know, if you hear a voice over your shoulder talking about your biggest failure or your biggest mistake, and that voice isn't calling you beloved, it isn't Jesus talking to you. The revolution that got everything started was the revolution of a new kind of love. A love before we were lovable. That kind of love is beautiful. That's why beauty will change the world. 1,000 years ago, Prince Vladimir the Great, the pagan monarch of Kiev, he was looking for a new religion to unify the Russian people. He sent out envoys to investigate the great faiths from the neighboring realms. And one envoy went to the Byzantine Christian capital of Constantinople, the birthplace of Eastern Orthodoxy. He reports to the prince what he witnessed, and his words went like this. Let me read them. Then we went to Constantinople, and they led us to the place where Christians were together as brothers and sisters, the church. And they were worshiping their God. We knew not whether we were in heaven or earth. For on earth there is no such vision nor beauty, and we do not know how to describe it. We only know that God dwells among them. We cannot forget that beauty. When Prince Vladimir heard about this unearthly beauty that they had witnessed as the Christians were together as the church, he adopted Christianity as the new faith for the Russian people. He wasn't drawn by its apologetics. He wasn't drawn to it by its ethics. He wasn't drawn to it by its pronouncements or its doctrines. He was drawn to it by its aesthetics, its beauty. 900 years later, one of Russia's most famous writers, Fyodor Dostoevsky, he wrote these words: "Beauty will save the world." Is that how the people of Marin view the people of the Quest? Are they blown away by your love? But what's the beauty? Is it the church buildings? No. Is it church music and choirs and dance? No. Is it church art? No. Is it church picnics? Yes! It is! It's the coming together of people who would have no reason on earth to hang together and eat together and sit at the same table together. Doctors with their patients, CEOs with the office workers, Ace fans with Giants fans, people from homes who look over the bay and those from apartments who look over trash cans. People with degrees, with people who don't even have their legal papers. Single moms and divorced couples with grandparents who were celebrating 50 years of marriage. Those who voted for the right and those who vote for the left. Those who have had abortions and those who march for life. Those who love rock music and those who love Nah. It's just a little bit too far, I think, country, you know? Like, nasal singers don't get to heaven. I don't think so. But don't you love church picnics? You should. They are agape picnics. They are holy moments. They are beautiful, despite the yucky potato salad that always appears. You and I have been loved, even when we were not that lovable. We've all got our guilty secrets. Secrets that haunt us. We've all got our history, whose shame we work hard to hide. But there's a new kind of love that has invaded earth. A love that creates value in what it loves. Jesus has come. And he has started a revolution. And that revolution has a word. And the word is beloved. And don't miss it. Don't miss it. Just in case you've missed it. Don't miss it. You are the beloved of God. This is the church. This is what the Quest are. You are the beloved of God. Now listen quickly, because Paddy's got to get to the game. It says these words, Beloved, if God so loved us, we also ought to love one another. He says that because it's so easy for me or you to come to church and think, oh yeah, I'm pro-love. You know, I love God and he loves me. It could be easy to catch this incredible grace-filled revolution and a love that includes whoever reaches out for it and takes it. It could be easy to love the love. But John quickly says as we finish, Beloved, if God so loved us, we ought to love one another. The difficult neighbor? Yep. The unlovable uncle? Yep. The selfish co-worker? Yep. The arrogant boss? Yep. The family member who pushes all your buttons? Yep. The self-righteous, pious Christian? Yep. We also ought to love one another. Would the people of Marin County say that the people of the Quest love one another? And would they say that love includes them? Those who don't come here believe what you believe? Act the way that you act? The story of the Quest that I know is that you are known for your love. It's on your mission statement. Living in union with the Son, in the service of the Father, through the power of the Spirit, for the benefit of the world. Is it really the world? So let me end by talking about my Twix bar. The box was open already because I ate one as I drove up here, okay? And hopefully there's one left before I leave so I can have another one as I go home. You're about to find one that you can have one, okay? The Twix bar. There's some guys who I know, and they live in a slum in Nairobi. I'm just back. And they could have escaped the slum and got a $5 a day job. But they didn't. They stayed to help the children who have nothing, poorer than the poor, completely forgotten, invisible. Like no Mzungas, no white people are in the slum. They're uncared for. But these 4 guys, they started a tutoring program. They'd each graduated high school. They knew math and writing and science. And so they began to do a tutoring program for the kids of the slum with the snotty noses and the yellow eyes who aren't being cared for or helped and have no chance of getting to school because school is not free. And first of all, 20 kids, and then 35 kids, and then 50 kids, and then 60 kids, and then 80 kids. And so they decide that they need to rent a room. And David, my good friend David, who had started the first year of medical school but couldn't afford to keep going, who's running this tutoring program, he says, well, we've got to pay the rent for the school. And so he begins to work as a trash guy, picking up the trash and getting $1 a day so he could pay the rent for the schoolroom or for the room that they're going to run this tutoring program in, because there's now 60 kids coming. Eventually, after 80 kids, 100 kids come, they say, we've got to kind of start a school, and the parents were asking for it. And so they're going to start a school, and they say, well, we've got to give the school a name. And so each of the 4 guys makes a suggestion. And one of the guys, called Jared, he suggests that they call it Faraha, which in Swahili means joy. And here's the kicker. Jared, this young guy who graduated high school, who's now investing in these kids, who'd chosen the name for the school, he dies of malaria. And the cost of a Twix bar would have kept him alive. But he didn't even have $2 to buy the medicines. I love Twixes. I buy them from the box load from Costco. I don't even know how much the box costs. I just swipe my card and don't give a rip. Because I love my Twixes. And yet this vibrant, young difference maker couldn't even afford a Twix bar, and he dies for the cost of a Twix bar. Poverty sucks. Because poverty kills, and it kills people that I know. And so it was too easy for me just to write a check or give $30 a month to some organization to look after some kids. I needed to let the poor live inside of me. And so I quit my job and decided I'm going to work for the poor. And so I have the most stinkiest job in the world. I go around Americans every day asking them for money. It's a horrible job. Because all I get is good intentions. It's amazing how many people have good intentions but don't give a rip. They'll tell you, just a bad time, Gilbert, but maybe, and they never do. Every day I wake up asking people, would you give a few dollars so that a guy like Jared doesn't need to die for the sake of friggin' $2? Would you love someone enough to create value in them? Because they feel like shit. And they're made to feel like shit because of us. There's no CNN cameras in the slums of Nairobi, Kenya, unless a politician arrives or Clinton visits. It's invisible. But every day, 24,800 children die because of hunger-related diseases, which $1 or $2 would change. Every 3.5 seconds, a kid drops dead because they couldn't have enough money to pay for any beans or rice for their belly, and 25 cents would make that happen. Since I got up here, 564 children have died. Just because of 565 children have died. Just because of 566 children have died. Just because of where they were born. But should where you live determine if you live? And Jesus says, beloved, if you love me, love one another. How far are the people of the Quest willing to go in their love for one another? Just Marin? Or really will you go to be the benefit of the world? So there is a love that creates value. May you continue to love in a way that creates incredible value in people around you, in your world, in your family world, in your work world, in your neighborhood world. But may your love have enough space in it to create value for the invisible people who live beyond you, who maybe you'll never see, but who need to know that they're loved. So you can join the movement. I got a little brochure. You can take a brochure if you want one. But I got a box load of Twixes. So here's the deal. You can buy a Twix off of me this morning, and every cent you give for this Twix will go to those kids. We give away 100 cents on the dollar. Our board covers our costs. Our costs are only 9 cents on the dollar. And so we give away 91 cents, but really our board covers the other 9. So we give away 100 cents on the dollar of what you give us. And you can buy a Twix from me. You can choose what to do with it. Eat it or keep it to remind yourself of how you're helping children and creating value in them even though you've never seen them. And then here's a little twist, folks. I'm Scottish. So this Twix bar, I'll sell it to you not for $2, not for $1, not even for 50 cents. We invented economics. $20 minimum. Don't tip the poor folks. That doesn't create value. And for the church's sake, any money you've got left in your wallet, you weren't giving it to the church anyway. You were keeping it for your sodden selves. So if you get any money left in your wallet, it's not going to affect the church budget. So, as we finish, you can come at the end and buy a Twix from me. Just lay your money in there. Take a brochure if you want one. Take the Twixes. I don't want to go home with the Twixes, okay? And if someone wants to buy the whole box, you can write a check to When I Grow Up for $360. And some of you can, and some of you will. Because you know that in living out this love, you don't just do it in word, but love is a verb, and you do it with action. And you create value in those who are unlovable. We're going to bow our hearts in prayer. The band will play some music as we exit, and make sure you leave this morning joining the movement to love those who you've never seen, but create value in them. Let's pray. Father, we are eternally grateful that you loved us before we were lovable, because we would be in a hell of trouble if we waited until we were lovable for you to love us. We are eternally thankful that you birthed a new kind of love. And now you ask us as the church to live out that love. I thank you for the multiple ways the people of the Quest love others. I thank you that there are people in Marin and beyond who have been touched and changed by the love that's flown from this congregation. Honor them, Lord. May this church be known as a church that loves and loves to create value in others by that love. So come, and as we leave today, may we know how much we've been loved, and may we go and love in ways greater than we ever imagined. In Christ's name, amen. Pleasure.
Thank you, Gilbert.
Hey, pleasure.
I really appreciate it. I've heard you speak here before.
Okay.
Yeah, my name's Sam.
Hey, yeah. Good to see you.
Fresno. I'm heading over that way to Huntington Lake, near Shaver Lake. I don't know if you're familiar with
I know it well. I know it well.
We
You
go
going to
with
camping?
the family, yeah. Solo racing.
My son is a ski instructor at China Peak.
Yeah.
So in the summer he's up there with his